Welcome to Dreamy History. Tonight, you are invited on a quiet journey, not one filled with roaring battles or fiery revolutions, but with paper, ink, and the soft hum of postal machinery. We'll be exploring the minute details of the postal stamp, its quiet design evolution, from the mid-19th century to the modern era. Before we begin, take a moment. Dim the lights. Sink slowly into your bed. Let the weight of the blanket hug your shoulders. Unclench your jaw. Soften your gaze. Breathe in and breathe out. Feel the day melt away. With each gentle word, let your thoughts slow. Let history whisper to you softly. And as the world outside quiets, let us drift back to a time when communication moved not through screens, but by horse, by ship, by rail, on tiny pieces of art known as stamps. In the mid-19th century, within a small, poorly lit printing workshop in London, the day begins not with a flurry of activity, but rather a series of carefully repeated rituals. The workshop is modest, with soot lining the wooden beams and the smell of oil lingering faintly in the air. The engraver, an older man with stiff joints and thin wire spectacles perched low on his nose, slowly makes his way to the main bench. He wears an apron that bears the evidence of countless previous morning sink stains in layered patches and frayed edges from years of use. Upon the worn workbench lies a new, unblemished sheet of steel, not yet touched by tools. The engraver runs his calloused fingers across the surface of the metal, not once, but several times, from edge to edge, corner to corner, feeling for imperfections that might not be visible to the eye. Each steel plate must be flawless, absolutely flawless. A single microscopic gouge or uneven groove could result in a printing defect, and a printing defect, though perhaps unnoticeable to the common eye, would be unacceptable in the meticulous world of stamp production. The steel itself is chilled, as it has been stored in a cool cupboard overnight, carefully separated from other plates by sheets of oiled cloth. As he begins the preparation, he dusts the surface gently with a rabbit hair brush, ensuring that no specks remain. He then applies a small amount of an abrasive compound mixture of pumice powder and water onto a lint-free cloth. With slow, circular motions, he polishes the plate for minutes at a time, sometimes up to half an hour, removing the tiniest irregularities that may have settled during manufacturing or storage. This process is not rushed. It cannot be rushed. To prepare a steel plate properly is not simply about mechanical readiness. It is about setting a tone for the entire day's labor. Once polished, the plate is set aside to rest briefly, allowing it to stabilize at room temperature. This is believed to reduce the risk of future warping during the engraving and inking stages. As the plate rests, the engraver prepares a second one, always having a backup in case the first proves unsuitable. These early steps, although seemingly uneventful, are essential and are repeated with the same diligence each morning. For the engraver and for the system he serves, consistency is paramount. The preparation of the plate is the beginning of a day that will unfold slowly, deliberately, and without variation. The engraving process begins after the plate has been deemed suitable, and it is here that repetition finds its purest expression. The engraver selects a burin, a small, handheld engraving tool with a V-shaped steel tip. The tool has been sharpened the previous evening, using a whetstone and oil, and tested by carving lines into a test plate. The angle of the tool is critical. Too shallow, and the lines will be faint and uneven. Too deep, and the metal will curl or fracture under pressure. The engraver settles into his stool, his back straight, his elbows propped gently against a cushioned support. Before beginning the first stroke, he lowers a magnifying glass from its brass frame mounted above the bench. The glass wobbles slightly before coming to a rest, allowing him to focus on the pre-drawn design-a-thin transfer sketch applied using a layer of waxed tracing paper. His subject is a portrait of Queen Victoria. It is not a new portrait. The same image has been rendered for years, if not decades. Each lock of hair, each delicate contour of her facial expression, each fold of the draped royal garment sole are to be engraved as they have always been engraved. The engraver begins with the outer border, carving straight lines, millimeter by millimeter. The movement is slow, mechanical, almost meditative. His wrist does not shake. His breathing is measured. Each cut into the steel is deliberate and exact. When the border is complete, he begins the inner details, starting with the outline of the face, moving cautiously toward the eyes. The portrait requires upwards of 1,000 individual strokes, and each one must be placed precisely according to the sketch. There is no conversation in the room. Occasionally, the engraver will pause, not to rest, but to reassess the depth and consistency of his lines. He inspects his work by tilting the plate under a gas lamp mounted above the bench. Light glances off the grooves, revealing inconsistencies invisible to the naked eye when viewed head-on. When necessary, he reworks a line, gently deepening it or smoothing an edge with a finer burin. This process, from first line to final curl, may take hours, sometimes days. The image is familiar, yet each plate presents a new set of microscopic challenges. As he works, time passes unnoticed. The engraver remains still, except for his hand, moving in small, repetitive motions. To the outsider, this may seem monotonous. To the engraver, it is a practiced form of quiet discipline, one repeated across the years, each day nearly indistinguishable from the one before. When the engraving is complete and approved by a senior foreman, the plate is prepared for printing. This begins with the careful inking process, a task no less repetitive than the engraving itself. The ink used in the mid-19th century is composed of linseed oil mixed with lamp black, creating a thick black substance that dries slowly and clings tightly to metal. It is stored in small ceramic pots, sealed with wax to preserve its consistency. The inker uses a soft leather roller, its surface repeatedly conditioned with oil to maintain elasticity. Before use, the roller is run over a slab of glass, both to distribute the ink evenly and to test its absorption. Once satisfied, the inker rolls the compound over the plate in long, even strokes. The ink fills the grooves of the engraving, pooling gently into the recessed lines. Next comes the wiping stage. Contrary to assumption, the plate is not wiped clean. Instead, the goal is to remove excess ink from the surface while preserving the ink embedded within the engraved lines. This requires a cloth known as a dabber, typically made from worn linen or softened cotton. The cloth is wrapped around the fingers and the wiping begins. Each stroke is light, methodical, and repetitive. The cloth is not dragged, but dabbed and lifted. Dabbed and lifted, always at the same angle. The wiping process can last for 20 minutes or longer per plate, depending on the depth and precision of the engraving. The edges are especially tricky, as the cloth must not pull ink from the lines while still removing surface film. At regular intervals, the plate is inspected under oblique light, which reveals the sheen of excess ink. The inker wipes again, often rinking and repeating the process multiple times until the surface reaches the desired balance, clean enough to prevent smudging, yet rich with ink in the engraved details. Only when the surface glistens faintly, with no visible pools or streaks, is the plate considered ready. Throughout the inking and wiping process, the room remains still. The only sounds are the soft rubbing of cloth against metal and the occasional clearing of a throat. It is not an art in the romantic sense, but it is precise, it is slow, it is necessary, and it is the same today as it was yesterday, and as it will be tomorrow. Once the plate has been inked and prepared, attention shifts to the paper-an element, no less critical in the chain of production. The paper used in stamp printing is not ordinary paper. It is gummed paper, carefully manufactured to exact specifications to ensure proper adhesion, ink absorption, and durability. The sheets arrive in tightly packed reams, each individually inspected at the mill before delivery. The paper is made primarily of cotton rag pulp, processed slowly and without added brighteners. This gives it a natural, off-white hue, slightly gray, slightly cream, and softly fibrous to the touch. Before use, each sheet is removed from the ream and held up to the light, inspected for thickness, consistency, absence of air bubbles, and uniform gum coating on the reverse side. The gum and adhesive layer, typically composed of a boiled-down mixture of dextrin and animal glues, not overly sticky to the touch. It dries to a smooth glaze, slightly tacky in warm conditions, and fragile under excess humidity. Care must be taken to handle the sheets only by the edges, preferably with gloved fingers or wooden tweezers. The printer, working slowly, places one sheet at a time onto the inked plate. The alignment is crucial. A misaligned sheet results in a wasted print, as even slight angular deviation will cause perforation and design mismatches during later stages. The sheet is gently smoothed over the plate using a soft, bristled brush, never pressing too firmly to avoid disrupting the ink distribution. Static electricity is a minor but present concern, particularly in drier seasons, and thus the room's humidity is monitored closely. Once the sheet is in place, it is lightly pressed by hand to encourage full contact between the inked plate and the gummed surface. The brushing motion is always the same: horizontal first, then vertical. Precision, calm, repetition. The act of laying paper is done quietly, often by the same individual who inked the plate, ensuring continuity and accountability. It is not exciting work, but it is essential. The heart of the printing process lies within the press itself. These were not industrial machines, as we know them today, but hand-operated presses, primarily of the flatbed variety, constructed from wrought iron and brass. They were large, heavy, and reliable. A single press could weigh over a ton, yet each component moved with surprising smoothness when properly maintained. Once the inked plate and paper are carefully assembled, they are slid into position between the press's bed and platen. The lever arm, typically several feet in length, engaged by hand. Operating the press requires a steady, controlled force. It is not pushed quickly or with strength, but drawn down gradually, allowing the upper platen to apply even pressure across the entire surface. A slow rotation of the crank engages the gear system. One complete impression can take upwards of 45 seconds. The pressure must be sufficient to drive the ink into the fibers of the paper without crushing the relief or damaging the gum. Pressmen are trained to listen to the sound of the gears, to feel the resistance in the crank, and to smell the faint metallic scent of heat and friction. Each pull of the lever is identical to the last. There is no variation permitted. The sound clunk hiss, and return is a lullaby of the print room. The act itself requires mindfulness, not thought. The printer often operates in silence, repeating the same motion dozens, then hundreds of times throughout the day. Sheets are printed one at a time. Each is removed after the press is released, placed on a cloth-draped tray, and left to rest momentarily before being carried to the drying area. The inspector, often an experienced worker with decades of service, sits with a magnifying glass and a steel ruler. Every printed stamp on every sheet is examined. The cutting process begins with measurement. Using a steel-edged guide and a mechanical cutter, the sheets are divided into equal rows. There are no perforations yet. These may be burned or pulped, depending on policy. No defective stamp is allowed to circulate. Every cut is straight, uniform, silent. Once cleared, the sheets are turned over and placed on a gumming board. The workers move from one station to the next with unhurried regularity. The perforation and gumming marks the last manual interaction before the stamps are packed. At this point, each sheet is now complete, bearing all the signs of human effort, machine precision, and procedural calm. Here, an additional layer of adhesive may be applied, typically a thin, even coat brushed by hand using a wide brush with soft bristles. Sheets are gently stacked in sets of 50, separated by wax paper to prevent sticking. They have done this every day, in the same order, with the same tools, at the same pace. They walk home through quiet streets. Their minds are not restless. They have no urgent thoughts, only the steady satisfaction of a process completed. Not dramatic, not heroic, but essential. His clothing is simple brown wool coat, black waistcoat, and a collar starched just so. Shelves are lined with ledgers, pamphlets, broadsheets, and books. To the back, past a curtain, lies the printing room, a single press, a workbench, and drawers filled with movable type, organized letter by letter, each resting in its designated slot. At the end of each day, a horse-drawn cart arrives from the General Post Office. He includes a sample sketch-an imagined rectangle with post paid at the top, a crown symbol in the center, and 1 penny at the bottom. The idea is not entirely novel, but it is refined, practical, executable. As a printer and local post office contractor, he is acutely aware of the delays and frustrations that come with the existing postage system. Chalmers includes a polite cover letter, introducing himself not as a visionary, but as a concerned citizen and tradesman. Then he waits. The system, inherited from centuries of bureaucratic evolution, requires the recipient, not the sender, to pay for mail upon delivery. If the recipient is unwilling or unable to pay, the letter is returned or destroyed. He revises the proposal slightly, adding figures showing how much time and money could be saved under a prepaid system. Always the same words, always the same careful penmanship. A man alone, submitting ideas into an indifferent system, day after day, with only silence in return. By 1835, it contains 5 entries, all unanswered. He is not discouraged, but he is aware of the silence. He applies a thin gum solution home, made from boiled starch and sugar on the back, brushing it with a flat bristle brush. The gum dries unevenly, and the prototypes curl slightly. Still, they are functional. No one sees these prototypes but himself and a few curious shop visitors who glance at them and move on. The newspapers focus on trade, politics, and the expansion of railways. Chalmers occasionally updates the design, adding a decorative frame, adjusting the font size, experimenting with shades of ink. It is, at times, a lonely task, but he treats it with reverence, not as invention, but as obligation. His sketches gather dust, his homemade prototypes curl at the corners. He is buried in a modest plot, the headstone listing his name, date of birth and death, and little else. At the time of his death, the concept of prepaid postage via adhesive stamps has already taken hold in Britain, but through other channels, under other names. The original envelopes he prepared a decade earlier are now yellowing around the edges. In the ledgers of postal reform, his name was missing. He died not in protest nor bitterness, but in the quiet resignation of a man who tried, repeatedly, in vain. His files, carefully labeled and tied with twine, remain stored in a drawer at the back of his shop. His work became synonymous with modernization, with efficiency, with Victorian progress. Meanwhile, in Dundee, the name Chalmers remained absent from conversation. The idea that two men could arrive at similar conclusions, independently, at different times, received little attention. The tone was always calm, always respectful, always supported by evidence. He enclosed reproductions of the original prototypes. He provided dates 1834, 1835, 1836, well, before Hill's 1837 memorandum. He did not claim that his father invented postage, only that he had contributed, that he had proposed a workable system before others did. The envelopes stayed sealed in a desk drawer. The shop was closed, its sign eventually taken down. Still, the family persisted. Over the years, they compiled a dossier, documenting every proposal James had sent, every sketch he had drawn. They sent these materials to philatelic societies, where they were occasionally reprinted in footnotes or appendices. They attended stamp exhibitions. They spoke at quiet events. Always the same goal: to ensure James Chalmers was not forgotten. In 1837, Hill submitted a formal proposal to Parliament, a plan to reduce postal rates, simplify the structure, and most notably introduce a prepaid adhesive stamp. They preserved the original proposals, sketches, and prototype envelopes. With care, they documented dates, copied correspondence, and created timelines of submission. For them, it was not about challenging the existence of the penny black, nor Rowland Hill's reforms. It was about inserting their father's name into the record softly, but permanently. With government support and growing public interest, the plan moved forward. In 1840, the world's first adhesive postage stamp was released, the penny black. It featured a profile of Queen Victoria, framed in black, with 1 penny written below. It became instantly iconic. His proposal was well organized, supported by statistics, and presented in a style far more aligned with the expectations of bureaucratic review. But somewhere, in an unopened cabinet in a government building, at least one of his letters likely remained in red, untouched, and filed without response. In town, little changes. The same streets echo with the same footsteps. The same shop doors creak open each morning. The design, the method, the implementation, all attributed to Hill. In government records, his name stood alone. In public ceremonies, it was Hill who received praise. Chalmers was not mentioned. No footnote, no citation, no reference. His letters, though perhaps similar in content, had arrived too early, too informally, and too quietly. And James Chalmers, still running his print shop, begins to show signs of age. Each envelope bears the stamp on the upper right corner. Its placement exact. His eyesight, once sharp enough to detect a half-point misalignment in a printing plate, now requires a magnifying lens for even basic reading. Yet he continues his routines. Letters still go out. Occasionally, a new proposal, now shorter, now more urgent, makes its way to London. Still no replies, not even rejections. He places the envelopes on a shelf alongside his growing stack of proposals. No one is calling for adhesive labels. But Chalmers continues, not out of ambition, but out of a quiet certainty that the idea is sound. Still, there is no response, not even an acknowledgement of receipt. It is a system plagued with inefficiency, confusion, and financial loss. The printer on duty signs a transfer ledger. One copy remains with the printer. The other travels with the shipment. The transfer is quiet. No conversation, no ceremony. He sees how rural families miss letters due to undelivered parcels. And slowly, as ink dries on pamphlets and books, his mind begins to turn. Not toward profit, not toward fame, but toward improvement. Not radical change, but quiet reform. In the back room of his Dundee shop, he drafts his first formal proposal for postal reform. Using offcuts of paper, he sketches stamp-like labels. They are not printed professionally, merely drawn by hand, in pen and pencil. Some include the British Crown. Others show a profile of Britannia. He experiments with typefaces, margins, and corner embellishments. He tries different border thicknesses. He measures dimensions with a brass ruler, noting the optimal size for visibility and envelope placement. It is not a dramatic document note, bold declarations, no revolutionary language, just a measured, plain argument, written in longhand on thick cream paper. He proposes the use of small, adhesive labels, easily affixed to envelope, syndicating that postage has been paid in advance by the sender. The cost, he suggests, should be fixed and affordable, 1 penny per letter, regardless of distance within the country. He begins writing notes in the margins of unused broadsheets, ideas about prepayment, about simplification, about accessibility. Each bundle is wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with string and sealed with wax. Labels indicating the plate number, print date, and batch code are affixed. These labels are handwritten by clerks seated at long desks, whose only job is to ensure correct labeling and documentation. The gum must not pool or streak. It is allowed to dry under controlled conditions, with the sheets placed on drying boards arranged in a tiered rack system. It is the final step before perforation, and it is handled with the same deliberate calm as the rest. The cart departs. Tools are wiped and stored in drawers lined with felt. Ink pots are sealed and labeled. Damp rags are hung to dry. Aprons are unfastened and folded. The floors are swept with stiff bristle brooms. The smell of metal, paper, and oil lingers in the air. The work is done. Horse-drawn carts roll slowly along cobbled streets, their iron-rimmed wheels clacking steadily. The chimneys of textile mills emit thin trails of smoke into the overcast sky. Amidst this gray calm, on a narrow street lined with sandstone buildings, sits a modest shop, its windows slightly fogged. The wooden sign above the door simply reads Bookseller and Printer J. Chalmers. Inside, the air is tinged with the scent of drying ink and old paper. The stamps are sliced cleanly into rectangular groupings, with a half-inch border on all sides to be trimmed later. The cutting blade is checked for sharpness every 10 sheets. If dulled, it is replaced. Precision is vital, as future perforation relies on perfect spacing. The inspector checks for uneven inking, misalignment, missing features, or smudges. Even a slight deviation in a single stamp can cause the entire sheet to be discarded. The face of Queen Victoria must be identical in every square, her eyes aligned, her profile unbroken. In this way, the rhythm of printing becomes almost ritualistic. It does not speed up, it does not slow down, it is constant. Freshly printed sheets must be dried with patience and precision. Unlike modern printing inks, the thick oil-based formula used in early stamp production takes a significant amount of time to set. The previously cut sheets are now passed through a hand-cranked perforating machine. The operator places the sheet carefully into position, aligning it against the guides. Once set, the handle is turned slowly, allowing the metal pins to press down and punch evenly spaced holes between stamps. The sound soft, metallic, and rhythmic is as predictable as a metronome. Too little drying time, and the ink will smudge upon touch. Too much time, and the sheets risk curling or collecting dust. In a corner of the print room, near a set of ventilated cabinets, stand the drying rack's wooden structures, with horizontal slats spaced exactly 1 inch apart to accommodate airflow. Each sheet is transferred to the rack by hand. The operator uses both hands to support the gummed ink-laden paper, ensuring that no corners fold or drag. They are labeled with paper tags indicating the time of printing to ensure proper rotation and inspection order. While drying, the ink continues to bond with the paper's surface, seeping microscopically into the fibers. The drying racks emit a distinctive odor mixture of evaporating oil, dust, old wood, and faint hints of glue. The smell is neither pleasant nor offensive. It is simply familiar. The racks can hold up to 50 sheets per shelf, though typically no more than 30 are used to prevent overcrowding. The drying process is passive. There are no fans, no heated coils, merely time, air, and stillness. The windows are kept partially open when the weather is dry, though gauze screens are in place to prevent insects from settling. Depending on humidity, ambient temperature, and ink density, drying may take between 6 to 10 hours. Some sheets remain overnight. Once dried, the sheets are taken to the inspection station-wide desk, illuminated by large windows or overhead gas lamps with frosted shades. Once approved, the sheet is marked with a pencil in the lower right corner and passed along for cutting. Discarded sheets are kept in a separate bin. Perforation is a technical process involving rows of tiny metal pins arranged on rollers. After perforation, the sheets are inspected again. Misaligned holes can render entire rows unusable. The entire process may take another several hours. It is not rushed. With perforation complete and gum fully dried, the stamps are prepared for shipment. The bundles are placed in padded wooden boxes lined with linen, then stored in the stockroom until ready for collection. The boxes are loaded. As the sun sets, the workers clean their benches. The workers do not speak much, and tomorrow it begins again. The year is 1820, and the town of Dundee, located in eastern Scotland, along the banks of the River Tay, moves at a predictable pace. James Chalmers, a man of neat habits and consistent manner, arranges papers on the front counter. Business is steady, though not remarkable. Chalmers spends his mornings setting type and his afternoons sorting mail for delivery. Chalmers has observed this for years. He notes how the poor avoid communication due to cost. The shop remains quiet. The routine remains unchanged. But in his small, repetitive world, a seed of innovation begins to take root. By the early 1830s, Chalmers's observations have congealed into conviction. He writes carefully, slowly. He uses his best pen. Each letter is even and balanced. The proposal is sent by mail to a regional postal authority. Weeks pass. There is no reply. He sends another copy, this time to a London postal official. Chalmers keeps a file for his correspondence. In it, he places carbon copies of his letters and proposals, organized by date. Postal reform is not a topic of widespread public concern. In the evenings, by candlelight, he copies his proposals again. Though official recognition remains elusive, Chalmers does not abandon his idea. Instead, he begins to experiment on his own. When he has produced a satisfactory sample, he prints several, using his shop's small press. The ink is dark, slightly glossy. The paper is coarse. He affixes the sample stamps to dummy envelopes, using an in-house print run of staged letters. Chalmers is not working toward commercial release. He is building a proof of concept, a physical manifestation of a theoretical solution. Still, he persists. The sketches pile up. The envelopes fill a drawer. The post office remains unchanged. The world continues its routine. But on a shelf in Dundee, adhesive postage takes shape in silence. As the 1840s give way to the 1850s, Chalmers's proposal remains unread by the institutions that matter most. His hands tremble slightly. Now, when setting type, he uses a cane to steady his gait across the shop's narrow floorboards. In 1853, Chalmers passes away quietly in Dundee at the age of 62. There is no ceremony of public recognition, no notice in national newspapers. Chalmers never witnessed the widespread adoption of his idea. His designs were never formally reviewed by the Royal Mail. His prototypes were never examined in committee. His files remained in the family's possession. While James Chalmers faded into obscurity, another name began to rise: Rowland Hill, a schoolmaster with an interest in postal reform. Unlike Chalmers's quiet submissions from a Dundee shop, Hill's proposal reached influential ears. The stamp bore no trace of Chalmers's influence. Hill continued his career with further reforms, public appointments, and increasing recognition. The penny black, for all its innovation, came at a quiet cost of forgotten voice and an unacknowledged beginning. Though James Chalmers himself did not live to see recognition, his family did not forget. His children, particularly his son, Patrick, maintained possession of his papers. In the late 19th century, Patrick began writing letters to editors of newspapers, to members of parliament, to historians and stamp collectors. The responses were mixed. Some offered polite acknowledgments, others dismissed the claims. They did not seek glory, only accuracy, not fame, just fairness. In time, Chalmers's name began to appear again, but not in headlines, nor on monuments. It appeared in scholarly footnotes, in appendices of stamp catalogues, in articles published by the Royal Philatelic Society of London. The tone of these acknowledgments was always careful. James Chalmers, a Dundee printer, is believed to have submitted adhesive stamp designs in the early 1830s, rarely more than a sentence. Occasionally, a photograph of one of his prototype envelopes would accompany a lecture or a journal article. Sometimes, his name would be referenced during stamp exhibitions as part of a display on the evolution of prepayment methods. The recognition was small but consistent. The footnotes accumulated over the decades. a quiet corrective to the narrative. Not a rewriting of history, but an expansion, a way to say this too existed. The family continued to keep records. The Chalmers name remained alive, not in bold text, but in the background of postal scholarship. In 1971, nearly 120 years after his death, a bronze plaque was mounted in Dundee. It was not large, it was not gilded. It sat on the side of a stone building where Chalmers's shop had once stood. The plaque read, in simple lettering, James Chalmers, printer and postal reformer, credited with early proposals for adhesive postage stamps. There was no unveiling ceremony, no speeches. The plaque was installed on a quiet Tuesday morning by 2 municipal workers with a ladder and a drill. Few passers-by stopped to read it. Most did not know the name, but the plaque remained, and over time it weathered. The bronze dulled, the lettering darkened. Moss collected in the corners, but the name stayed visible. For the Chalmers family, it was something, a mark, a place, a fixed point in the geography of history. And for history itself, it was a quiet nota reminder that not all inventions are born loudly. Some begin in stillness, in dusty rooms, in proposals unanswered. James Chalmers did not invent the postal system. He did not revolutionize government. He did not publish books, nor deliver speeches. But he left something behind, a concept, a sketch, a persistence that carried across years, beyond silence. Each time a stamp is affixed to an envelope, whether gummed, self-adhesive, or digital, its origins trace back to men like him. Men who observed inefficiencies, who proposed changes, who wrote letters that went unanswered, who submitted ideas that disappeared into the machinery of state. Chalmers's legacy is not carved in marble. It exists in archival boxes, in family collections, in obscure journals, in the margins of history books, and in the quiet act of placing a stamp on a letter. A stamp may be small, often overlooked, but it carries with it a system. And systems are built not just by those who succeed, but by those who try. And Chalmers tried. Each scene will continue the monotonous, detailed style, focusing on overly technical and quiet historical features for sleep-inducing narration. The penny black, issued in 1840 as the world's first official adhesive postage stamp, was designed with more than just visual clarity in mind. While the profile of Queen Victoria is undoubtedly its most recognizable feature, deeper inspection reveals a system of subtle control markings, tiny letters printed in each corner of every stamp. These letters, seemingly decorative at first glance, formed an internal grid system that allowed postal authorities to monitor production quality and identify individual stamps on each plate. The grid consisted of 20 rows and 12 columns. Each stamp in a row began with the same first letter, ranging from A to T. The second letter indicated its column position from A to L. Thus, a stamp labeled AA was in the first row, first column. BL would be in the second row, 12th column, and so forth. Each of the 240 stamps on a single sheet had a unique letter combination. This system of dual letter corner markings allowed for immediate identification of the stamp's exact location on the master plate. The reason for this redundancy was not artistic, but procedural. If a stamp was found with a defect, smudged ink, missing lines, misalignment, postal officials could trace the fault back to its specific location and even identify recurring problems on that part of the plate. This system was not initially well known to the public, but it was essential for internal quality control and was viewed as an early form of process accountability. The letters themselves were set in tiny serif fonts, carefully aligned with the frame lines of the stamp's border. Their placement had to be precise, as irregular letter spacing or misaligned corner letters could itself indicate a flaw. Over time, collectors began to recognize these corner letters as tools for plate. Entire studies were written just on these corner marks. The process of matching letters, row by row, column by column, became its own slow art. Though these control letters never changed the stamp's function, they became symbols of unseen regulation, quiet measures, placed not for show, but for the systematic preservation of order within the Postal Service. Most people never noticed them, but they were always there. In the quiet workshops, where stamps were engraved by hand, a small but consistent tradition emerged, one that was never officially sanctioned, but not entirely hidden either. Some engravers, working long hours at their benches, began embedding tiny symbols, initials, or marks within the complex decorative scrollwork of stamp borders. These additions were not visible at first glance, nor were they meant to be. They required magnification, careful study, and an understanding of what to look for. The marks might appear as a pair of overlapping letters, perhaps the initials of the engraver, or a subtle reference to their hometown. Others took the form of slightly exaggerated curls in a floral motif, or a faint alteration to a star or crown design. These alterations never affected the legibility or overall function of the stamp, but they gave the engraver a sense of quiet authorship. In an age where credit for such work was rarely formalized, these marks were a form of signature, private, concealed, but present. Authorities occasionally detected such symbols, especially when a curious philatelist brought them to light. Reactions varied. Some were quietly tolerated, others were removed from future print runs, but rarely were engravers punished. The marks were too small, too discreet, too embedded within otherwise functional designs. Over time, collectors began cataloging these engravers' marks. French stamps from the 1870s often included a small LD hidden in the corner, leaves attributed to Louis Delhomme, a noted master engraver. German issues from the 1890s were rumored to include a crescent-shaped notch intentionally added by a Bavarian artisan. These stories, whether true or exaggerated, became part of stamp culture, a culture of minutiae, where even a half-millimeter swirl could become the subject of decades of study. No guidebook listed these marks officially. They remained unacknowledged in catalogs, but for those who spent years studying early issues under magnification, they offered a personal connection to the human hands behind the mechanical processes. Not dramatic, not bold, just deliberate. Despite all procedures, all reviews, and all standards, misprints still occurred. And when they did so quietly discovered, not in the moment of printing, but sometimes weeks, months, or years later. Misprints were unintended anomalies that escaped inspection. Printing errors, plate misalignments, ink smears, or design reversals that slipped past every pair of careful eyes. The most famous of these, the inverted Jenny from the United States in 1918, featured an upside-down airplane, the Curtiss JN for Jenny, at the center of what should have been a celebration of American aviation. Only one sheet of 100 stamps bore the error. It passed through normal postal processing before being sold at a small post office in Washington, D.C. The mistake was later discovered by a collector, not by a clerk or a postal official. The reasons for such errors are typically mechanical. Misaligned printing plates, improper plate registration during multicolor applications, or human error during feeding all played a role. In the case of multipass printing where each color layer is added separately, a slight misplacement of a single sheet could lead to off-center images, shadow doubling, or reversed colors. These were usually caught and discarded, but some very few made it through. Collectors call them errors, but in the world of philately, they are more than that. They are anomalies, exceptions that became legendary. The result is not chaos, but fascination. They are categorized, classified, and indexed with intense specificity. Color omitted, double impression, perforation shift, and so on. Entire catalogs are devoted solely to listing known misprints, including their origin, their quantity, and known examples. For most users, such errors go unnoticed. The letter still arrives. The message still reads. But for those who study the margins, a misprint is not a failure. It is a puzzle, a chance to trace the exact moment when a plate slipped, when an operator blinked, when the system, so predictable, briefly wavered. These errors do not shout, they whisper. Quiet imperfections in an otherwise flawless grid. At first glance, stamp borders appear decorative, mere flourishes, curlicues, or national emblems to occupy space around a central portrait. But these borders often held much more. Canadian stamps of the late 19th century frequently featured the maple leaf, not large or central, but repeated in tiny symmetrical groupings along the edges. The symbol of the maple, associated with Canadian identity since the 1700s, became part of a visual language. Similarly, Egyptian stamps employed the lotus flower, a motif dating back to ancient dynasties, nestled within linear bands at the top and bottom of the stamp design. These weren't gestures toward antiquity. They were attempts to root a modern bureaucratic artifact in centuries of cultural heritage. In Portugal, stamps often incorporated ship's gravels in full sail within their borders, reflecting not just the age of discovery, but the state's desire to link past maritime glory with modern sovereignty. The ships were rarely centered, always small, always quietly rendered in sepia or olive green tones, encased in scrollwork or ropes. In Japan, chrysanthemum emblems occupied corners and interstitial spaces, evoking imperial authority without explicit textual reference. Designers followed rigorous guidelines. Symbols had to be proportionate. Frame lines could not overpower the central figure. Placement had to maintain symmetry across the vertical and horizontal axis. Minor alterations to these borders required committee approval. Yet they persisted, design after design, year after year, becoming part of a visual tradition that outlived the original postal intent. Most users never noticed these symbols. They focused on denomination, legibility, and postage. But the symbols remained quiet reminders of cultural continuity, present in every envelope, every corner, every quietly stamped line. In the technical world of stamp production, especially during the transition from monochrome to multicolor printing in the early 20th century, registration dots became an essential but nearly invisible part of the process. These dots, small circular marks, often printed outside the main stamp design, served as alignment guides for printers managing layered ink applications. They were not decorative. They were not public-facing, but they were indispensable. The process required precision. Multicolor stamps were printed using separate plates for each ink color: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, known collectively as CMYK. Each colored plate had to align perfectly with the others, or the resulting image would appear blurred or doubled. To assist with this, Printers added registration dots, usually just 4 at standard positions in the margins, 1 at each corner of the plate, or sometimes in offset alignment at the top and side. Before printing began, pressmen would produce test impressions. They would examine the alignment of these dots under magnification. If any dot was out of place, it indicated a shift in the plate's position. Adjustments were made using micro-calibration screws on the press. This process could take hours. Every degree of plate movement mattered. A millimeter of misalignment meant colors would overlap incorrectly, blue halos around black lines, or red borders seeping past floral frames. Once printing began, the registration dots continued to be monitored at intervals. Sheets were pulled randomly and inspected under loop. Dot alignment had to remain within a tolerance range, usually less than 0.2 millimeters. If misalignment was detected, printing paused, adjustments resumed, then tests repeated. It was a cycle, repeated endlessly. Precision, pause, correction, print, repeat. But to printers, they were sacred, invisible tools of quality assurance, guiding hands behind the finished product. One of the least visible, yet most widely implemented security features in stamp production is the watermark. Unlike ink-based designs or perforations, watermarks are embedded within the very fabric of the stamp's paper, created during the paper manufacturing process before a single drop of ink is ever applied. Watermarks are not added after the fact. They are born with the paper. A watermark is made using a dandy roller-light, cylindrical roller fitted with raised wire designs. As the wet paper pulp passes through the rollers during production, the dandy roll presses the design into the sheet, thinning the fibers slightly in specific areas. The result is a translucent mark, visible only when held up to light or viewed under magnification. It is subtle but distinct. Different postal authorities used different watermark designs, crowns, letters, stars, or abstract patterns. The British Post Office, for instance, used multiple watermark styles across decades, some with simple crown shapes, others with more elaborate ER monograms. The United States used the USPS watermark in various orientations. Each change marked not just security updates, but shifts in printing contracts and paper suppliers. Watermarks also serve to deter counterfeiting. Reproducing them required access to the paper mills, not just printing plates, placing them beyond the reach of casual forgers. Yet for the average user, the watermark was never seen. Most never looked. But for collectors and inspectors, it became a diagnostic feature. A stamp might appear identical in design and color, but its watermark determined authenticity and issue year. Detecting a watermark requires patience. The stamp must be soaked, dried, and viewed against a dark background. Some collectors use watermark fluid, a non-damaging chemical solution that temporarily increases visibility. The process is slow, requiring time, care, and a very steady hand. They are not meant to be admired. They are meant to be hidden, but they remain, silently embedded, faint imprints of authenticity in the very fibers of history. With the advancement of printing technology in the late 20th century, a new layer of security and detail emerged in stamp production, microprinting. These are letters, words, or numbers printed so small that they are nearly invisible to the unaided eye, often no more than 0.3 millimeters in height. They require magnification, sometimes even digital enhancement, to be read clearly. Microprinting began as a countermeasure against increasingly sophisticated forgery attempts. As color photocopiers and digital scanning became more accessible, traditional visual elements, such as portraits and borders, could be replicated with relative ease. But microprinted text, due to its scale and precision, remained largely uncopyable with standard reproduction equipment. On many U.S. forever stamps, for instance, the word USA or freedom may be printed along the edge of a design element, perhaps within the border of a flag, or around the inside curve of a presidential collar. These words blend into the surrounding lines. Most users never notice them. Their presence is confirmed only by holding the stamp under a 10x or 20x magnifier. The printing process requires advanced plate etching and laser-guided positioning. The ink must maintain edge definition without bleeding, and the paper's surface must be smooth enough to support such fine lines. Test runs are analyzed under calibrated microscopes. If the text appears smudged or distorted, the plates are discarded and recut. Collectors, too, have embraced microprinting. Catalogs now include microtext locations and readings as standard identifiers. A single word's orientation, horizontal versus vertical, can distinguish one issue from another. Some stamps include intentional decoy microprints to mislead counterfeiters. The stamps still function like any other. They are licked, stuck, and mailed. Their journey is the same, but within them, within the border of an eagle's wing or the edge of a monument's pedestal, lies a message so small, so precise, that only the patient ever see it. Hidden text, hidden purpose, hidden history. As political systems shift, currencies evolve, and empires dissolve, stamps designed to be both functional and symbolic must be revised. Sometimes this revision does not require a new design, but rather a modification of an existing one. Enter the overprint. A stamp already printed, later modified, with additional text, symbols, or cancellations, usually applied with a secondary printing process. These changes mark the stamps as obsolete in one context and repurposed for another. Throughout the engraving, progress is tracked in a logbook. Entries are made each date, number of hours worked, portion of design completed. This log remains internal and is rarely read by anyone outside the engraving division. Eventually, the plate is completed. It is polished, inspected, and initialed in the lower corner, not visible on the printed stamp, but etched into the plate itself. The assignment is complete. The engraver's name will not appear on the stamp, but his work will. Once the master engraving is completed, the plate is used to create a test proof. This is not a full production run, but a small, carefully controlled trial. The goal is not to produce quantity, but to assess quality. Only a handful of impressions are made, typically no more than 10. The paper used is heavier than normal issue stock, and the ink is limited to black, regardless of the stamp's intended color. The plate is prepared by a press technician who cleans it thoroughly, applies a thin layer of test ink, and adjusts the pressure settings of the press to accommodate the heavier proof paper. The process is slow. Each proof is hand-fed, aligned with precision, and printed under supervision. Once printed, the sheets are laid flat on a drying rack for a minimum of 8 hours. The ink must cure completely before inspection. When dry, each proof is mounted on a backing board and labeled with identifying information: plate number, date of proofing, operator initials, and stamp design code. A watermark reading, not for circulation, is applied diagonally in pale red ink. The boards are placed in protective envelopes and submitted to a review officer. The review involves examination under both natural and artificial light. Loop magnification is used to assess line clarity, ink distribution, and relief depth. The print must show consistent density, with no signs of plate wear or burrs. The margins are measured with a ruler calibrated in tenths of a millimeter. If approved, the test proof is signed by the supervisor and filed in the official design archive. One copy may be kept by the engraver for reference. The remaining proofs are stored in acid-free sleeves in a temperature-controlled cabinet. The stamp is now one step closer to production. No announcement is made. No change occurs outside the building. But inside the bureau, a quiet milestone has been reached. Although stamp designs are primarily approved through internal channels, there are occasional moments when public response is acknowledged, though not openly solicited. These instances do not involve surveys or focus groups, but rather a passive collection of reactions from newspapers, philatelic publications, and unsolicited correspondence. Once a design has passed initial stages and appears likely for issuance, select mock-ups or announcements may be quietly released to the press. These pre-released articles, typically placed in the back pages of national newspapers or trade journals, mention the stamp's theme, denomination, and expected issue date. A small black and white image may accompany the text. Public response, if any, arrives in the form of short opinion pieces, letters to editors, or commentaries in collector newsletters. The language is usually subdued. We question the necessity of another military figure. One might write, "An attractive rendering of a national park," says another. The volume of feedback is low. It is not tracked by software. Clerks clip relevant articles and place them into folders labeled public comment. Within the bureau, these clippings are not discussed in meetings. They are read quietly, noted silently, and inserted into the stamp's administrative file. On occasion, if negative feedback is consistent or well argued, it may trigger a memo to the advisory committee for re-review. The phrase "sufficient public concern" may appear in the margin of the report. No one is formally assigned to manage public opinion. It is handled by rotation, whoever is available, often a junior assistant. Notes are made in pencil. No names are recorded. No direct responses are sent. The process is intentionally slow, intentionally indirect. Public reaction is acknowledged, not invited. Feedback is preserved, not debated. Even significant criticism rarely results in withdrawal. The design proceeds unless halted by internal decision. The public, for the most part, never notices. The stamp appears. It is used. It is collected. And eventually, it fades into the routine of postal circulation. Its design never quite remembered, never quite forgotten. Once a design is fully approved, a plate is ready, and all responses have been filed. The next step is scheduling the stamp's actual production. This scheduling process is managed by the Production Planning Division of the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. The task is routine, ongoing, and governed by availability of machines, personnel, materials, and calendar alignment with other postal releases. The scheduling clerk begins by consulting a large paper calendar mounted on a corkboard. This calendar displays every stamp issue projected over the fiscal year, coded by month, denomination, theme, and series. Colored pins and adhesive labels indicate print readiness, pending approvals, and completed runs. A whiteboard beside the calendar lists current press availability by machine number, plate compatibility, and maintenance status. The clerk reviews upcoming slots. Each production run must be carefully timed to avoid overlap with others using similar paper stock, ink formulations, or denomination groupings. The process involves multiple ledgers, one for paper deliveries, another for ink usage, a third for employee rotations. All three must align before a print window is approved. Once a date is selected, it is entered into the master production schedule. The entry is made in pencil first. Final ink is not applied until the slot is confirmed by both the pressroom supervisor and the quality assurance lead. Any last-minute shifts due to breakdowns, personnel absence, or shipment delays must be accounted for by manual adjustment. Scheduling is not completed in one sitting. It may take several days. Email is rarely used. Communication occurs through internal memos and carbon-copied slips of paper placed in designated trays. Each tray is checked twice daily. Once the schedule is confirmed, a small note is added to the stamps file. Print window secured. No press begins. No sheet is run, but the stamp is now assigned to time. A silent countdown begins, and then nothing happens. Not for a while, but the schedule holds. While most stamps are released without fanfare, select commemorative issues are marked by formal ceremonies. These ceremonies are modest, usually held in libraries, civic buildings, or post offices, attended by a small group of dignitaries, employees, and local officials. Planning for these events begins weeks in advance. A subcommittee within the United States Postal Service handles these arrangements. The process begins with a memo to the Office of Communications, requesting event coordination for a named stamp. A location is proposed, often tied to the subject of the stamp. A battlefield for a military issue. A birthplace for a figure. A relevant landmark for a theme. Venue requests are made in writing, using a 3-page form outlining date, time, seating capacity, microphone availability, and postal exhibit space. The form is mailed, not emailed, to the venue manager. A response, when received, is filed in the master event binder. The program schedule is kept simple. Welcome, remarks from a local official, a brief speech from a postal representative, unveiling of a poster-sized stamp image, and optional distribution of first-day covers. Scripts are typed and printed on cream-colored cardstock. Speakers are provided with a pre-written statement. Revisions must be submitted no later than 5 business days prior to the event. Invitations are printed in black ink on white cardstock. They follow a standard format: centered text, block lettering, no images. Mailing lists are composed from postal directories and civic databases. No RSVP is required. On the day of the ceremony, folding chairs are arranged in rows. A podium is placed near a stamp-themed banner. A small table holds a ceremonial cancellation stamp, pre-inked, with extra pads in case of dryness. There is no music. Refreshments are optional and typically limited to water and plain cookies. When the event concludes, all materials are packed into labeled crates and returned to central storage. A report is written. A photo may be included. Then the stamp, now ceremonially launched, enters circulation just like every other, with the stamp's design approved, engraved, proofed, scheduled, and ceremonially launched. The final step is distribution, a process, quiet, methodical, and unannounced. Sheets of printed stamps are cut, counted, stacked, and shrink-wrapped by clerical staff at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. These bundles are then packed into standard issue cardboard boxes, each labeled with content codes, weight, and destination. The boxes are transported by secure truck to regional distribution centers across the country. The route schedules are printed on daily logs. Each box is scanned upon loading. There are no announcements, no special handling. They are treated as government property, neither valuable nor fragile. Once delivered to local post offices, boxers are unpacked in the back rooms, never in public view. Sheets are removed and placed into drawer units. A clerk applies the new issue sign, prints a pricing sheet, and slides a few panes into the glass display case. There is no launch music, no public address. The stamp is placed quietly behind the counter. Some customers may notice, most do not. They buy their stamps, address their envelopes, and leave. No one says, "Today is the first day of this issue," but it is, and the process begins again. And so, as our journey draws to a close, we leave behind the rows of printing presses, the hushed committee meetings, the hand-engraved lines and margin codes, the faded plaques and forgotten proposals, all of it now resting quietly in the gentle twilight of history. Stamps, those tiny paper tokens, so easily dismissed, so commonly handled, yet so thoroughly, so consistently, so patiently produced. Every line on every stamp engraved by hand, every color aligned by registration dots, every image selected through layers of approval, slow, repetitive, unwavering. The lives of those who made them, engravers, inspectors, clerks, committee members, and silent designers, were shaped by steady hands, careful measurements, and routines that rarely changed. Each task repeated, each tool checked, each sheet reviewed. A world not of urgency, but of deliberate precision, where a quarter millimeter mattered, and where silence was the default setting of the room. And when mistakes occurred, a misprint, an overprint, a hidden symbol tucked into the border, they became quiet legends, not with headlines, but with footnotes. Tonight, as you rest beneath your blanket, as the breath moves softly in and out, let the rhythm of their lives settle over you. The quiet clack of the press arm, the brush of a dabber over metal, the click of a perforator turning, the rubber stamp dipping in ink, rising, descending again. Let their stillness become your stillness. Let their repetition be your comfort. For as you drift into sleep, you carry with you a history not written in bold, but printed in miniature, layered with care, and preserved in forgotten drawers, and in the hush of night, with no more forms to sign, no more trays to file, no more envelopes to inspect. You can finally rest, as the stamps once did, quiet, exact, and perfectly placed on the page of time. Good night.